My husband thought he hung up the call. Kept recording for 4 minutes and 12 seconds, every word. He called me naive. He said it the way people say things, when they're absolutely certain no one who matters is listening, relaxed. Almost fond, the way you describe a golden retriever that keeps running into the sliding glass door, unbelievably. Naive, like it was one of my more charming qualities, like it was the reason the whole plan worked. He was right that I was naive. He was wrong about everything else. I was sitting in traffic on the I-90 overpass, rain coming down so hard my wipers couldn't keep up when I called Daniel to tell him I'd be home early. He answered on the third ring in that voice, the impatient one, the one that had a way of making me feel like an interruption in my own marriage. I'm in the middle of something. We'll talk later. Click. Except the Bluetooth didn't disconnect. My phone showed the call still active. 3 seconds of ambient silence. Then his music voice came back completely transformed, loose, warm almost. Laughing. Good God, she's suffocating. Sometimes. And then a laugh I would have recognized in a blackout. Rebecca, my best friend since our second year at university, the woman who had been my maid of honor, who had sobbed through my vows with the specific gorgeous ugliness of someone genuinely overcome, who had held both my hands in a hospital waiting room 3 times, music 3 times, while I lost pregnancies, and she told me it wasn't my fault, and she would be there for whatever came next. That laugh. I just don't want my baby growing up confused about who his real family is, she said, in the playful private voice of a woman who was completely comfortable where she is. My hands went white on the steering wheel. I did not make a sound. I did not breathe incorrectly. The rain kept falling and the traffic did not move, and something inside my chest turned to music. Absolute glass, not broken, just suddenly terrifyingly transparent. And I sat perfectly still and I listened. Daniel's voice dropped low, the register he used when he thought he was being clever. Don't worry, Emily is unbelievably naive. Once the $5 million trust payment from her father hits our joint account next month, I move everything offshore. Then I file for divorce. We disappear. She's left with nothing. Rebecca laughed again softly, the way she laughed at things that delighted her. And Daniel added one more thing, quiet, casual, the throwaway line of a man who had been holding it for a long time and was finally comfortable enough to let it go. Besides, he said, she's already proven her body doesn't work the way it should. The miscarriages. He was making a joke about the miscarriages to Rebecca, who had held my hands in the hospital music 3 times. The recording kept running for minutes and 12 seconds total. I know that number exactly because I have listened to it many times since then. Not out of pain, out of the specific, clarifying satisfaction of a person who knows precisely what they have. When the call finally dropped, I sat in the traffic for a long time and breathed very carefully and let the rain be as loud as it needed to be. There was something enormous happening inside me that I refused to release into the interior of my car because I needed to be clear. I needed to think before I felt for perhaps the first time in my music marriage, and I needed to do it fast. I did not go home. I drove to my father's office. My name is Emily Bennett Calloway, and I need you to understand something about my life before I tell you how it unraveled, and then in the space of 3 weeks, reconstructed itself into something I hadn't thought to want. I grew up the only child of Harold Bennett, who built Bennett Capital over 40 years, starting with a freight forwarding company and a philosophy about people that he summarized in 2 rules: trust slowly and never let a snake stay warm in music, your house. My father is 71 years old, short, silver-haired, and possessed of the particular stillness of someone who's been lied to by very good liars and learned decades ago to watch hands instead of faces. He had never liked Daniel. He expressed this when I was engaged with the measured restraint of a father who understood that telling his daughter not to marry someone was the single most reliable way to ensure she did exactly that. He said, he's impressive in rooms, Emily. Just make sure you know who he is in the ones without an audience. I told him Daniel was wonderful, kind, attentive. I told him he would come around. I had been married to Daniel Calloway for 6 years. He was a financial consultant with a client list he guarded carefully and a lifestyle that had always been slightly more expensive than I understood his income to fully support. I had never examined this too closely. My father had settled a trust music in my name at $35 million timed for my early 30s, and Daniel had known about it since. Before our engagement, because I had told him, because I trusted him, because I was, as he accurately identified, unbelievably naive. He was handsome in the particular way that reads as trustworthy music at first glance and takes years to understand is actually just symmetry. He was good at dinner parties. He had the gift of making other people feel chosen, which in the early years he had directed at me and which I had confused for love. Rebecca Harlow had been my closest friend since we were 20. She was the kind of beautiful that made rooms quiet when she entered them, and she wore it carelessly, the way people wear things they've never had to think about. She was funny and warm and fiercely loyal. I had believed that last part so completely that I had never once thought to question it. She and Daniel had always gotten along easily, too. Easily, maybe. There had been a moment at a party 2 years ago when I had come out of a bathroom and found them talking in a way that stopped when I appeared. Not obviously, just a half second. Recalibration, a slight shift in how they were standing. I had filed it under nothing. I was always filing things under nothing. The miscarriages were the years 2020, 2021, and 2023. If you have been through one, you know what 3 of them does to a person. You know what it does to a marriage if the marriage is not built to hold it. Daniel had been present for all 3, attentive, appropriate, saying the right things with the practiced fluency of someone who understood what the right things were. I had been grateful for his steadiness. I had not considered that steadiness in the absence of genuine feeling are sometimes indistinguishable from the outside. Rebecca had been there for all 3, too, sitting with that. Now I feel something I don't have a clean word for, not rage, something colder, the specific cold of understanding a long deception after the fact, when you can trace the map backward and see every place where you believed the ground, and it wasn't ground at all. I walked into my father's office at 6:48 p.m. without an appointment, which his assistant Margot, 22 years with him, recognized as the kind of situation that did not require one. She showed me straight in. My father was at his desk. He looked up when I came in, and his face did the thing it does when he's assessing a situation, music before asking a question, a brief total stillness, like a camera autofocusing. I sat down across from him. I placed my phone on the desk between us. I pressed play. Music. I did not say a single word. He listened with his eyes closed. This is how my father listens to things. He needs to fully understand. He removes vision from the equation, so nothing competes with what he's hearing for minutes and 12 seconds. His face gave away nothing except around the 2-minute mark, a tightening at the corners of his mouth that I had seen twice before in my life, both times immediately before something consequential happened. When it finished, music, the office was very quiet. Then he said, "Do you want justice or do you want revenge?" I said, "Both." He almost smiled. Good. He picked music up his desk phone, not his cell, the landline, and made 2 calls. The first was to Martin Shaw, who has been my father's private legal counsel for 19 years and who has a forensic accountant's thoroughness applied to every area of human activity, including, as it turned out, marital fraud. The second was to a man named Richard Voss, who runs a private investigations firm out of Chicago and who has worked exclusively music for Bennett Capital for 11 years. My father described the situation to each of them in the flat, factual language of a man issuing instructions, not asking for comfort. He told them both 3 weeks, full scope. Then he looked at me. Does Rebecca know about the trust? I thought about it. I don't think I ever told her the amount. Daniel told her. My father said it wasn't a question. I nodded. It was obvious now. Go home, he said. Act normal. Do not confront. Do not change behavior. Do not give any indication whatsoever that you know anything. Can you do that? I looked at my father. I've been doing it for 6 years without knowing I was. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. I suppose you have. I went home. I made dinner. I asked Daniel about his day. He told me about a client meeting. He seemed relaxed, warm, attentive. The version of Daniel that had made me fall in love with him. The version I now understood he deployed strategically, like a setting on a device when he needed me compliant and content. I smiled and listened and said all the right things. That night, lying beside Him in the dark, I stayed very still and breathed at the rhythm of someone. Asleep, thought about the recording, and I thought about 3 miscarriages, and I thought about 6 years, music, and I thought about Rebecca's laugh on that. Phone call, the comfortable private. Laugh of someone fully at home in a place that belonged to someone else. I did not sleep for approximately 3 hours. Then I made a decision somewhere in the early dark that the next music 3 weeks for a job, I had a role to play, and I would play it with complete commitment because anything less would cost me everything, and I was not going to let them take anything else from me. Not one more thing. The first week, Richard Boss's team established the surveillance perimeter. Richard briefed me and Martin Shaw at a private meeting at my father's offices on a Wednesday morning. He was 53, compact, music, ex-FBI financial limitations. He placed a folder on the conference table and opened it to the first page. Music. They've been meeting at the Kimpton Hotel on Michigan Avenue for approximately 4 months. He said weekly, sometimes twice weekly. We have photographic documentation of 14 confirmed meetings. He laid the photographs out in a row. Exterior shots, lobby shots, 2 through a restaurant window that showed Daniel and Rebecca at a corner table, his hand over hers, both of them entirely comfortable and unaware. The vehicle parked at her building most Thursday evenings is registered to a Shell LLC that traces back to a leasing agreement co-signed by Daniel in June of last year. I looked at the photographs. I did not feel what I might have expected to feel. What I felt was the specific cold confirmation of something I had already processed in the car, in the rain, on the overpass. The photographs didn't break anything in me. They just closed the final gap between what I knew and what was documented. The financial trail, Martin said. Richard opened to the next section. This is where it gets interesting. He walked us through it. Daniel had opened 2 accounts in the previous 8 months. 1 in his name alone, 1 in the name of a holding company, and had been making small, regular transfers from our joint account that fell below the reporting threshold, each one too small to trigger attention. Together, they formed a systematic pipeline pointing offshore. He's been testing the system, Martin said. Practicing, Richard agreed. How much has he moved so far? Approximately $340,000. That was my money, my inheritance from my maternal grandmother, folded into our joint account years ago when I believed we were building something together. $340,000. Moved in increments small enough that I might never have noticed if I hadn't been looking. Martin turned to me. The trust payment. Your father had already begun the transfer process. It was scheduled for the 15th of next month. Martin nodded. We cancel it internally and say nothing. The account will appear to process normally from Daniel's perspective until the moment he tries to access it. My father said from the chair at the head of the table, he needs to believe the money is coming. That's what keeps him patient. The second week, I went shopping with Rebecca. I want you to sit with that for a moment. I drove to her apartment on a Saturday morning. I buzzed up. She came down in workout clothes, her hair in a ponytail, carrying 2 coffee cups, handing me one, the way she had for years, automatic, warm, the gesture of someone who knew your order by heart. I took it and said, thank you, and smiled, and it fit so perfectly into the muscle memory of our friendship that for about 4 seconds I almost forgot every word of the phone call. Almost. We walked to a baby boutique on Oak Street that she had been excited about. She'd mentioned it the week before. I had written the name down. I was playing my part. She picked up tiny onesies, held them against herself, asked my opinion on colors. She was 7 months along and genuinely beautiful, the round-faced, loose-limbed contentment of a woman in late pregnancy, and I stood beside her and said she was glowing, and I asked about names, and I meant none of it, and she noticed none of it. I thought about the recording the entire time. I thought about, I just don't want my baby growing up confused about who is real family is. I thought about what that meant for the baby, who was real and blameless and headed into a situation that was not his fault in any direction. I didn't let myself think too long about that part because that part required more grace than I had available at the moment, and grace would have to come later. When we hugged goodbye on the sidewalk, she said, you seem really good lately, really settled. I am, I said. I really am. She squeezed my arm. I watched her walk away, and I felt Something that was not quite pity and not quite anger and not quite grief, but had elements of all three layered under. An absolute calm that surprised me every day during those 3 weeks. Music, where it came from, I wasn't entirely sure. Maybe from the car in the rain when I had needed to be clear and had discovered something in myself that could be clear when it needed to be. The second week, Richard's team added one more piece to the file. The baby, I had not asked for this information. Richard had simply noted in the clinical language of his report that the timeline of the pregnancy and Daniel's confirmed movements as documented had created a small but notable discrepancy. He had, with my father's authorization, requested that a paternity analysis be initiated through a private medical documentation service, not a legal test, yet just a preliminary assessment of timelines, dates, and a cross-reference of Rebecca's medical records obtained through the channels that private investigators use when clients have the resources to authorize them. He laid the summary on the table in the 3rd week's briefing. The timeline of the pregnancy was consistent with the conception date that overlapped with a 3-week period during which Daniel had been on a business trip to London. It was also consistent with a man named Thomas Hale, a name that appeared 3 times in Rebecca's documented contact history during the same period associated with hotel records from the same city. Richard said nothing editorially about this. He just laid the documents down and let the data be what it was. My father looked at it, then he looked at me. I said nothing. There was a kind of terrible lopsided justice in it that I did not fully process until later. Daniel had sacrificed our marriage, my trust, 6 years, 3 pregnancies worth of grief shared under false pretenses, had spent months building an exit strategy for a future that was built on a foundation that may not have been real. He didn't know yet. Neither did Rebecca. I decided I would let them find out together. The dinner was my idea. I told Daniel I wanted to celebrate the trust payment the way it deserved. Intimately, at home, just the 3 of us. I said it in a way that framed it as a gift to him, a quiet marking of a new chapter. He agreed immediately. He even suggested the menu, which almost made me laugh. I cooked. I set the table with the good dishes. I opened the wine Daniel liked. I arranged the flowers. Rebecca had brought white tulips, her signature hostess gift. She'd brought them to every dinner party in our friendship, in the center of the table, because their presence in that room felt accurate to me in a way I couldn't have explained, but that music satisfied something precise. We ate. We talked. Daniel checked his banking app 4 times during the appetizer course. I watched his eyes drop to the screen and come back to the table wearing the slightly glazed expression of a man performing presence while his mind is somewhere offshore and counting. Rebecca was warm and attentive, the version of herself she wore in social settings. Engaged, music, funny, asking good questions, creating the impression of someone fully present. She and Daniel were careful not to look at each other too long, disciplined. I could see the restraint in the calibration of their eye contact, the microsecond course corrections when they'd held each other's gaze. Music, a beat too long. They were so proud of themselves. That was the thing that kept striking me. The pride, the barely contained satisfaction. Music of 2 people who believed they were the smartest people in the room, who had looked at me across years of friendship and marriage and decided that what they saw was a soft target. After dessert, I stood up. I picked up the sealed envelope I had placed on the kitchen counter 2 hours earlier and walked to the head of the table and set it in front of Daniel. The payment arrived today, I said. Music. Congratulations. He grabbed it before I had finished the sentence. His fingers moved fast, tearing the flap with the eagerness of someone who has been waiting a long time for a thing and cannot manage their own anticipation. His eyes hit the first sheet and went to the numbers immediately, which is where a man like Daniel always looks first. Music, then his face. The photographs were first. Richard's team had arranged them chronologically for team meetings at the Kimpton, the corner table, the car parked at Rebecca's building, date and timestamps on every frame. Then the financial summary, the $340,000 moved in staged transfers across 8 months, account numbers, routing, documentation, the offshore destination, account with Daniel's signature on the authorization, and then the transcript, 4 minutes and 12 seconds, word for word. I had formatted it cleanly like a script, Daniel, Rebecca, Daniel, so that every word was attributable and Unambiguous. His voice, her laugh. And the line about my body not working the way it should, sitting there on the page. In 12-point Times New Roman, the most casual line of the conversation, the one I knew would follow him. The color left. His face the way water drains from a bathtub, not all music at once in a steady, inevitable direction. Rebecca had gone completely still. She was looking at the photographs with the focused, almost analytical expression of someone running rapid calculations. Music, I sat back down. I folded my hands on the table. The money never reached our account. I said, Dad canceled the internal transfer the same day I played him the recording. I paused. Music, also, this house is owned by his company. It always has been, which Daniel knew before we signed the lease agreement. I looked at Daniel steadily. You have 10 minutes. He found his music voice. Emily, there's one more page. I slid the final document across the table. Richards. Report on the timeline, the London overlap, Thomas Hale, the dates. Daniel looked at it, then at Rebecca. Rebecca looked at it, then at Daniel. And in her face, in the very specific way, the calculation behind her eyes shifted and then stopped. I saw the moment she understood what the last page meant. Music, not just for the room, but for everything she thought she had been building, every sacrifice she thought she had made, every future she had planned on the foundation of what was apparently not, in fact, certain. Her face crumbled, not performance, genuine. Daniel's mouth opened, closed. Music opened again. The mouth of a man who has always had the right words available and is discovering for the first time that the supply is finite. I looked music at him. You sacrificed everything, I said, for a future that was never even real. He didn't answer. The fraud music case is with Martin Cho and a forensic accounting firm. The $340,000 plus damages. Music, the divorce petition was filed this morning. I picked up my wine glass. A civil claim for financial misconduct in a marriage takes approximately 14 months to fully adjudicate. Daniel, you built your offshore account using funds from a joint account that was fed directly by my trust distributions, which makes every dollar traceable and recoverable under marital asset law. I took a slow, quiet sip. Martin sends his regards. I set the glass down. Now, get out of my house. They left. Not immediately. There was a period of approximately 90 seconds that I will not describe in detail, except to say that it involved Daniel attempting 3 different openings and me saying nothing, just watching him until the absence of any available response became its own kind of answer, and he stopped trying. Rebecca left first. She picked up her jacket from the back of her chair, and at the door she turned and looked at me with an expression, music, I had never seen on her face before. Not guilt exactly. Something more disoriented than guilt. The expression of a person who has just discovered that the map they were using was wrong and does not yet know where they actually are. She didn't say anything. She left. Daniel left 4 minutes later after attempting once more in the entry hall to reframe what was happening, and I told him that his attorney had Martin Cho's number, and that was the appropriate place for that conversation. And then the door closed and I was alone in my house with the good dishes and the white tulips and 4 minutes and 12 seconds that had changed the direction of everything. I want to tell you what happened to them, because I know you need to know. The divorce petition filed by Martin Cho on the morning of the dinner cited financial misconduct, misappropriation of marital assets, and fraudulent representation in connection with the trust fund, a specific legal mechanism in Illinois that my father's team had been careful to establish documentation for across the 3-week investigation period. The $340,000 was fully recoverable. The offshore account, music, once identified through the documented authorization trail, was frozen within 60 days through coordination with Martin's financial forensic specialist. Music, a woman named Dr. Patricia Wren, who had 20 years of forensic accounting experience and who described Daniel's offshore structure in her report as elementary in its execution and amateur in its concealment. That phrase appeared in the formal legal documentation. I have read it several times. Daniel's financial consulting practice lost 2 major clients within the first month after the divorce petition became public record. These things become public record. And a third when a reporter from a financial industry publication working on a piece about marital asset fraud found the court filings and published a summary The story did not use his name directly. His clients are the kind of people who read financial industry publications carefully and recognized the details. Rebecca and Thomas Hale, the London connection I heard about through a mutual friend. Indirectly, about 4 months later. I do not know the current state of that situation, and I have concluded that I do not need to. What I know about the baby is this. He is real. He is blameless. He did not choose any of the people who made the decisions that shaped the circumstances of his arrival. Whatever happens to him, I hope it is not defined by what was done in that room before he existed. I think about that sometimes. Martin Cho finalized the divorce settlement in 7 months, which he described as unusually fast for a contested financial case, and attributed it to the quality of documentation. The recovered assets plus damages assessed under the fraud provisions came to $412,000. Total, the trust payment, the $5 million that had set all of this in motion, was restructured into a protected account in my name alone, inaccessible to any future marital claims. My father and I had dinner the week the settlement finalized. He ordered the good wine, which he reserves for significant occasions. We talked about the company, about my next steps, about the house, which I have music kept because I like, the kitchen, and because it is mine in every way that matters. Somewhere in the second glass, he said, I should have told you more clearly when it mattered. I said, you told me. I wasn't ready to hear it. He nodded. That was the whole conversation on the subject.